Hello, friends. I'm Professor Filip Kovacevic, and this is the third edition of the Russian Newspapers Monitor. Imagine that you are in Moscow. You are walking down the street not far from the Kremlin and the Red Square. You notice a small newspaper stand to your left. You stop to take a look. You pick up a copy of the Rossiyskaya Gazeta, the newspaper owned by the Russian government. The date is October 17th, and on the front page, to your surprise, you see a familiar face, the US Vice President Joe Biden. This can't be good, you say to yourself. You immediately start reading, and this is what you find. The title of the article is Biden Attacks Russia, and the photo shows him with his finger threateningly pointing at someone in front of him. Now, before I get to this article, let me just remind you that from the very beginning of Obama's presidency in 2009, Joe Biden has been put in charge of running the US foreign policy agenda for East Central Europe, Russia, and Central Asia. He, and not Obama, has been the key person for these very important regions of the world. As I have written in several articles for the Boiling Frogs Post, and most recently in my article on Biden's visit to the Balkans, in playing this role, Biden has behaved like an arrogant imperial proconsul. He would regularly round up the US puppets installed as political leaders in the vast majority of the countries in question after the end of the Cold War. And he would dictate to them what to do and how to serve not the US vital national interests, which would benefit all US citizens and people living in the United States, but the highly particular interests of the US military, industrial, intelligence, and media complex. These leaders would gladly do their homework assigned by Biden because their positions in power depended not on their domestic legitimacy, but on the support of the US deep state, which looked the other way in the matters of their high-level corruption and abuse of power. And no wonder then that the ordinary people in these countries began developing negative attitudes toward the United States in general and became more open to the influences from those who had no choice but to become the opponents of the United States. Not only Russia, but as will become very clear in the next 5 years, China as well. I say that they had no choice because by not doing so, by not rebelling against the United States NATO-imposed new world order, they would have betrayed everything their cultures and traditions have stood for generations. Ever since Russia decided to rebel and take a stand to defend its national sovereignty and basic national pride, it has become a perpetual punching bag for Biden. And his recent statements that this particular article is about are just another example of this essentially supercilious attitude. More specifically, the article refers to Biden's threats that the US intelligence agencies are preparing cyber attacks on Russia, which will be undertaken, according to Biden, and this is a quote, at the necessary time to make the biggest impact. The article notes how Moscow has replied to these threats. First, there are statements by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Putin said that the reasons for the anti-Russian reactions of this nature have to do with United States domestic politics. I quote, "They have many problems there, and in cases like that, it is typical for politicians to try to divert the attention of their voters using this method. That is what we are seeing here." Putin added that the Russian government has constantly been hearing threats like these from the various US administrations. There is nothing new in that, stated Putin. We know that they are eavesdropping and monitoring us all the time. The only news, according to Putin, is that the United States is now publicly admitting that it is doing something that openly violates international norms. Secondly, there was an official statement by Sergei Ryabkov, the Russian deputy foreign minister, and I quote, "For us, it is both sad and worrisome that Russia has become a play card in the United States presidential elections. The new wave of threats finds us ready, and we will know how to react adequately." Moreover, Ryabkov compared Biden's threats to the cries in the marketplace and said that there was no way Russia could be either swayed or scared by such cries. In addition to Biden, the article also cited the retired General James Stavridis, the former chief NATO military commander, a military figure with a thick anti-Russian public record, who is currently pretending to play the role of an impartial academic, is the dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. Stavridis directly called on the CIA to attack the Russian internet capabilities. The article linked his acting out to the recent statements by the Hillary Clinton presidential campaign, which, according to the article, uses the alleged Russian cyber threat to divert the attention of potential Democratic voters from what it calls the dark side of Clinton's own political activities. The article also noted that both WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden made fun of Biden's threats, saying that the essential aspect of a covert operation is its secrecy, or at least plausible deniability for its sponsors and perpetrators, whereas Biden told the entire world about it. This perhaps shows that in his anti-Russian rage, Biden may have said more than he was supposed to. As I showed in my Newsbud article mentioned earlier, even during his recent Balkan visit, Biden made some bizarre statements, such as praising the Prime Minister of Serbia for the positive reforms in Croatia. However, this is far from being a laughing matter, because as the article points out at the end, quoting Vitaly Churkin, the Russian ambassador to the United Nations, the relations between the United States and Russia are at the worst point since the early 1970s. And this stems from the fact that the US top officials show fundamental disrespect for anybody who is critical of their hegemonic imperial agenda. The agenda that, in my opinion, is both economically unsustainable and politically damaging for the authentic US national interests. The second article for today comes from Izvestia, the edition for October 18, 2016. It is the front page article dealing with the EU sanctions against Russia. The title of the article is "New Sanctions Will Collapse Aircraft Industry in Europe," with the subtitle clarifying that EU factories won't be able to function without the Russian titanium. The article explains that a new set of sanctions against Russia due to its recent behavior in Syria are proposed by the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. And remember my comments about her antagonistic relations with Russia from the second edition of the Russian newspaper's Monitor. These new sanctions will focus primarily on the industrial military complex and the aircraft construction. According to the article, their impact will be more negative for the European Union manufacturers than for Russia. This is because without the cooperation with the Russian producers of titanium, the Europeans will no longer be able to build modern planes. The question of the sanctions will be discussed at the meetings of the heads of the European governments, which will be held in Brussels on October 20th and 21st, 2016. This article continues on page 3 of the newspaper and is accompanied by the photo of a despondent-looking Angela Merkel dressed in a worn-out black coat, standing by herself, note this, by herself, next to a gigantic European Union flag. According to the Izvestia source for this article, who comes from the Russian defense sector, there is only company in the world, the Russian VSM Avisma, which produces titanium parts, without which it is not possible to put together the fuselage and other segments of the newest civilian aircraft, such as the Airbus 350, Airbus 380, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and the Boeing 7478. These aircrafts are built out of composite materials, which are lighter than ordinary aluminum. The Russian company in question has contracts with both Airbus and Boeing, and all titanium parts in these aircrafts are produced by it. The article quotes Alexei Chepa, who is the deputy president of the International Affairs Committee in the Russian parliament, saying that all economic sanctions are unproductive and that Russia at this time will not respond with new countermeasures. He stated that he hoped that these companies would continue to work with Russia and with the Russian suppliers in spite of sanctions. At the same time, the article reveals that Russia and China have been closely cooperating on constructing a new type of civilian aircraft, seating 250 to 300 people, with the plans to sell it not only on the Russian and Chinese markets, but also throughout the world. In addition to sanctions, this would be yet another serious blow to the EU and US companies. In addition to the sanctions dealing with the military-industrial complex, the European Union may also decide to stop the construction of the second underwater gas pipeline called the Nord Stream 2, connecting Russia and Germany directly. The Nord Stream 1 has been operating since 2011 and has transferred great quantities of the Russian gas to Germany without any middleman and avoiding possible blackmail by the neighboring hostile states, such as Ukraine and Poland. To stop the Nord Stream 2 is exactly what certain US and NATO high officials, including the former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen, have advocated for a long time, in order to make more business opportunities for the Western liquid gas suppliers and also isolate Russia from the European economic space. However, if this in fact takes place, natural gas is bound to get more expensive for ordinary European households. The article mentions that so far Merkel can only count on being supported by Great Britain, no surprise, considering the extent of paranoid Russophobia within the present British government, by France, in which the campaign has already started for the presidential elections in 2017, and the Russians are not favoring the current president François Hollande, and by Sweden, which is the old Russian opponent from the days of the Cold War. At the same time that this is taking place in other EU countries, and even within the Germany itself, there is a lot of opposition to new sanctions. The article claims that one of those opposing the sanctions is the foreign minister of Germany, Frank-Walter Steinmeier. However, as I have demonstrated in my investigative article for Newsbud, this is only Steinmeier's public persona, with the probable intention of fooling the Russians. In private meetings, as I have shown, Steinmeier is as big of a Russophobe as the British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson. Italy may be a different story. For this article, for instance, the Izvestia interviewed the president of the Association of the Italian Industrialists in Russia, Ernesto Ferlenghi, who said, quote, "In the relations between the EU and Russia, we, meaning the EU, should nurture the same thing we did for more than 50 years, the long-term strategic partnership and open dialogue on all issues." Overall, in my opinion, the purpose of this article in Izvestia was to convince the Russian audience that the sanctions are more radically damaging to the European Union than to Russia, and that therefore it makes a lot of economic sense to lift them as soon as possible. Now, let's go to Pravda, which is the newspaper of the Russian Communist Party. The Russian Communist Party is the largest opposition party in Russia, and it's very critical on Putin on domestic economic matters. It is the best organized political force of the opposition in Russia, and the only one that can offer a credible alternative model of the Russian development that will not lead Russia to becoming a colony of the West and prevent its being broken up into 5 or 6 smaller states, as has been the plan of the US and NATO globalists and hegemonists since the end of the US-Soviet Cold War. So let's look at the edition of Pravda for October 14, 2016, because it features the interview of the Communist Party leader Gennady Zyuganov on the front page. The interview was given to the Czech newspaper Parliamentary News. The title is "We, meaning the members and sympathizers of the Communist Party, are for the establishment of a just world on our planet." And here are some of the main points of what Zyuganov said. Answering the question as to whether he believed that the United States wanted to destroy Russia or only to weaken it, Zyuganov stated that there had been a long series of the Western attempts to attack and subordinate Russia ever since the times of the Russian Tsars Ivan the Terrible and Peter the Great. Yet all those attempts, including the ones by Napoleon and Hitler, have been unsuccessful. The same will happen should NATO and the United States directly attack Russia, claims Zyuganov. However, Zyuganov believed that there would not be a direct attack, but a long, drawn-out effort to weaken and strangle Russia economically. And according to him, the current economic sanctions play a role in this strategy. At the same time, the political forces in Russia who promote the neoliberal economic model, the model of the big capital-friendly privatizations, uncontrolled foreign investment, the so-called free trade, and the cuts in social programs are still in power. They hide behind Putin and Putin's populist rhetoric, but still do their treasonous job for the global corporations and corrupt oligarchies against the interests of the ordinary Russian people. This is why, according to Zyuganov, a completely new program of economic and social policies which would make the resources of the state available for the needs of the people should be put in place. The living standards of the ordinary Russians must be raised by nationalizing corrupt businesses and jailing those who abuse their power to get rich quickly. A fully new team of patriotic politicians, not the ones working for the foreign capital and the big business bosses in Russia itself, must take over political power if the country's stability is going to be preserved. Zyuganov also sharply criticized the interventions of NATO in former Yugoslavia and Libya, as well as the United States invasion of Iraq. He condemned the expansion of NATO into East Central Europe and claimed that NATO's intention is to encircle Russia and make it unable to protect its vital national interests. This is why Zyuganov supports the Russian turn to find allies in the East and the Russian close cooperation with China in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Zyuganov also condemns the aggressive nature of the US foreign policy, which, according to him, consists of constant intelligence and military provocations against Russia and all other countries that reject the US global hegemony. Zyuganov states that the US upper classes need a war in order to eliminate the gigantic national debt by making other countries forgive what they are owed by the United States. Zyuganov claims that neoliberal capitalism as an economic system has failed globally, and that more and more people in the world will become supportive of the leftist idea of a democratic, people-oriented socialism. He pointed out that millions of people in the United States supported the campaign of Bernie Sanders for the Democratic presidential candidate. In conclusion, Zyuganov stated that, in his opinion, Russia has enough political and economic potential to play a decisive role in making the world a better place for all its inhabitants. And so, there you have it, the interview of the leader of the Russians' largest opposition party. The bottom line, while the United States elite is destroying the world, the Russian elite can help rebuild it on more just foundations. And lastly today, let's turn to the very popular semi-tabloid press in Russia. This week, we'll look at the Russian semi-tabloid weekly newspaper, Argumenty and Fakty, which means arguments and facts. This is the largest circulation newspaper in Russia. It publishes around 3 million copies a week. And we look at the edition for October 19, 2016. On the front page, there is a very interesting text. It is a question by the reader, and the answer to this question by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. The title of the question is, what to expect from the United States? In other words, what can an ordinary Russian citizen expect from the US foreign policy establishment? More specifically, the reader Tisha Baldova from Moscow asks, the relations with the West are getting worse every day. The US Vice President Joe Biden threatened Vladimir Putin by promising to send a painful signal as a revenge for the hackers' attacks of which he accused Russia. To what extent is all this serious? What to expect from the United States? Asked Tisha Baldova. Well, there is no way to check whether or not this is a genuine reader's question or whether it was written by an editor under an assumed name in order to give a chance to Putin to reply. In any case, I see the whole thing as a creative way to alleviate the possible fears of the Russian population. The idea is to make people aware that the president has the situation under control and that they have nothing to worry about. So now, let's see how Putin replied. Oh, wait a second. Why do his words sound so familiar? Well, they're familiar because they are not stated in reply to the esteemed Tisha Baldova from Moscow, but come from the press conference Putin gave at the meeting of the BRICS countries a few days ago. So the whole thing was staged. It'd be nice if Putin found time to reply to an ordinary Russian citizen, but this time it was only a make-believe. Still, it is worth repeating the gist of Putin's statements. He said that threats and even actual cyber attacks on Russia by the United States are nothing new. And yet, Putin said Russia does not want a confrontation and would much rather work with the United States to try to resolve global problems that face the entire planet. So once again, we see Putin publicly offering the United States an opportunity to make a deal. If the United States does not take it, it will just confirm the suspicion of ordinary Russians that the United States leaders, and especially Joe Biden, are arrogant bullies. In the same edition of the newspaper Argumenty and Fakty, on the page number 2, there is an article about the results of a public opinion poll conducted in Russia on who the Russians think will become the next US president, and also how they react to the two candidates, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. The poll was conducted on October 2nd, 2016, and it included a sample of 1,000 respondents from 320 cities and 160 villages all across Russia, which makes the results of the poll scientifically credible. So let us look at the results. 36% of the respondents actually believed that Donald Trump would become the next US president, and 31% think that the president will be Hillary Clinton. That's not a big difference, but it is still different from how the two candidates are doing in the polls in the United States. In terms of the likability of the candidates, however, Trump is way ahead among the Russians. Trump makes a positive impression on 38% of the respondents, while Clinton positively impresses only 8%. The dislike gap is also very big. While Trump is disliked by 20%, Hillary Clinton is disliked by 61%. That is 6 out of 10 respondents. Such attitudes can probably be explained by how the respondents think the two candidates will relate to Russia once they get elected. 38% said that the relations would improve if Trump got elected, while only 10% expect that if Clinton becomes president. In terms of the relations getting worse, if Trump gets elected, this is the expectation of only 6% of the respondents. And if Clinton gets elected, 37% expect the dark clouds on the horizon. The conclusion is that the Russians clearly prefer Trump. But who, in fact, they will get a chance to deal with, we will see on November 8th. Thank you for your time today. Please support Newsbud Kickstarter Drive. Be cool and stay cool until the next edition of the Russian Newspapers Monitor.
Last June, a new media platform was introduced, and the people spoke, making Newsbud the #1 most successful journalism campaign in Kickstarter history. Leading the Newsbud team with nearly 2 decades of a proven track record is award-winning activist, publisher, and author Sibel Edmonds.
Hi, I'm Sibel Edmonds, the founder and editor of Newsbud, a 100% people-funded media with integrity. About a year ago, as I set about creating the objectives of this one-of-its-kind media project, the establishment and establishment-oriented people called it a mission impossible. According to them, a media model 100% free of corporate advertisement, a media entity without backing from foundation sugar daddies, a news organization that refrained from subscribing to partisan politics, the red or blue pill, was an impossible dream. Last June, thanks to you, thanks only to you, not only did we make the phase 1 of this media project possible, but with your backing, we also made it the most successful and most funded Kickstarter journalism project of all time. Everything we have accomplished has been made possible by you.
Newsbud is building a one-of-a-kind, multimedia news platform only made possible by you, the people. No corporate advertisers, no money from the foundations, and no government ties. We are the only 100% people-funded multimedia news source out there. Your support is needed. This allows Newsbud to recruit the best and the brightest from around the world to give you the news and analysis you won't find anywhere else. The Newsbud team as a whole speaks 7 different languages. This unique quality allows Newsbud to offer you unmatched geopolitical news and analysis from Sibel Edmonds, Christoph Yerman, and Filip Kovacevic of Russian Newspaper Monitor.
Be a part of the movement for making possible the new democratic, independent media on the internet. Support Newsbud.
We have writers and analysts who served in the military, providing expert exposés on the military-industrial complex, like Christian Sorensen in his monthly Department of Defense reports, and Newsbud analyst Eric Moshe.
Newsbud's work is shaping up to make big dents in the artificial armor of corporate media conglomerates, who run sanitized news programs and rarely show every side of the story when it comes to world events and analyses. However, with this breakthrough platform, we've got the potential to become a treasure trove of meaningful exposés, holding powerful people and organizations accountable and tracking international fervor as it unfolds. If you are looking for a well-organized effort characterized by integrity, valuable insights, and admirable motives, look no further.
Seasoned investigative researcher, writer, editor, and producer of the Geopolitical Report, Kurt Nimmo.
Newsbud is an important alternative to media produced by the corporate propaganda matrix and the national security state. Every week we produce content that you won't find covered by establishment media outlets that claim to offer investigative journalism. Please consider joining us in making Newsbud the #1 most funded Kickstarter journalism project of all time. People need to know what's really going on in the world, and Newsbud is working toward that goal. Thanks for your support.
Newsbud executive producer and editor Spiro Skouras.
We are extremely grateful and humbled from the overwhelming support that we received during our initial campaign. Phase 1 allowed Newsbud to establish our foundation, which is key for any operation. In Phase 2, we intend to build upon that foundation and expand our operation. Having access to the needed resources will ensure that Newsbud will remain a leader and trendsetter in the alternative media and beyond.
Support independent media. Go to Kickstarter.com today.
We have a long way to go, not only to continue, but to expand, become more effective, and grow together. We are only answerable to you, and you are the only ones who can keep Newsbud in existence and allow it to go much further in pursuit of journalism with integrity. Please join us. Join the Newsbud movement by kindly and generously pledging towards this 100% people-funded media with integrity. We have accomplished a lot, but this is only the beginning, and that is my promise to you.